This is a reading of Copperfield in the Jungle, written by Ruskin Bond, read by Prerna. Grandfather never hunted wild animals. He could not understand the pleasure some people obtained from killing the creatures of our forests. Birds and animals, he felt, had as much right to live as humans. There was some justification in killing for food, most animals did, but none at all in killing, just for the fun of it. At age of 12, I did not have the same high principles as grandfather. Nevertheless, I disliked anything to do with shikar or hunting. I found it terribly boring. Uncle Henry and some of his sporting friends once took me on a shikar expedition into the Terai forest of Sivalix. The prospect of a whole week in the jungle as camp follower to several adults with guns filled me with dismay. I knew that long, weary hours would be spent tramping behind these tall, professional-looking huntsmen. They could only speak in terms of bagging this tiger or that wild elephant when all they have caught, if they were lucky, was a wild hare or a partridge. Tigers and excitement, it seemed, came only to Jim Corbett. This particular expedition proved to be different from others. There were 4 men with guns, and at the end of the week all that they had shot were 2 miserable underweight wild fowls. But I managed on our second day in the jungle to be left behind at the rest house, and in the course of morning's exploration of the old bungalow, I discovered a shelf of books half hidden in a corner of the back veranda. Who had left them there? A literary forest officer? A Mem Sahib who had been bored by her husband's campfire boasting? Or someone who had no interest in the manly sports of slaughtering wild animals and had brought this library along to pass the time? Or possibly the poor fellow had gone into the jungle one day as a gesture towards his more bloodthirsty companions and been trampled by an elephant or gored by a wild boar, or accidentally shot by one of the shikaris, and his sorrowing friends had taken his remains away and left his books behind. Anyway, they were there, a shelf of some 30 volumes, obviously untouched for many years. I wiped the thick dust off the covers and examined the titles. As my reading taste had not yet formed, I was willing to try anything. The bookshelf was varied in its contents, and my own interests have since remained fairly universal. On that fateful day in the forest rest house, I discovered P.G. Wodehouse and read his Love Among the Chickens, an early Oak story and still one of my favorites. By the time the perspiring hunters came home late in the evening with their spent cartridges and lame excuses, I had made a start with M.R. James's Ghost Stories of an Antiquary, which had me hooked on ghost stories for the rest of my life. It kept me awake most night until the oil in the kerosene lamp had finished. Next morning, fresh and optimistic again, the shikaris set out for a different area, where they hoped to bag a tiger. They had employed a party of villagers to beat the jungle, and all day I could hear their drums throbbing in the distance. This did not prevent me from finishing M.R. James or discovering a book called A Naturalist on the Prowl by E.H.A. My concentration was disturbed only once when I looked up and saw a spotted deer crossing the open clearing in front of the bungalow. The deer disappeared among the sal trees, and I returned to my book. Dusk had fallen when I heard the party returning from the hunt. Great men were talking loudly and seemed excited. Perhaps they had got their tiger. I put down my book and came out to meet them. "Did you shoot the tiger?" I asked excitedly. "No, my boy," said Uncle Henry. "I think we'll bag it tomorrow. But you should have seen this. We spotted a deer." There were 3 days left, and I knew I would never get through the entire bookshelf. So I chose David Copperfield, my first encounter with Dickens, and settled down on the veranda armchair to make the acquaintances of Mr. Micawber and his family, Aunt Betsy Trotwood, Mr. Dick Peggotty, and a host of other larger-than-life people. I think it would be true to say that David Copperfield set me off to the road to literature. I identified with the young David and wanted to grow up to be a writer like him. But on my second day with the book, an event occurred which disturbed my reading for a little while. I had noticed on the previous day that a number of stray dogs belonging to watchmen, villagers, and forest guard always hung about the house, waiting for scraps of food to be thrown away. It was 10 o'clock in the morning, a time when wild animals seldom come into the open, when I heard a sudden yelp in the clearing. Looking up, I saw a large leopard making off into the jungle with one of the dogs held in its jaws. The leopard had either been driven towards the house by the beaters or had watched the party leave the bungalow and decided to help itself to a meal. There was no one else about at the time, since the dog was obviously dead within seconds of being seized, and the leopard had disappeared. I saw no point in raising an alarm which would have interrupted my reading. So I returned to David Copperfield. It was getting late when the shikaris returned. They were dirty, sweaty, and as usual disappointed. The next day we were to return to the city, and none of the hunters had anything to show for a week in the jungle. Swear words punctuated their conversation. No game left in these jungles, said the leading members of the party, famed for once having shot two man-eating tigers and a basking crocodile in rapid succession. It's this beastly weather, said Uncle Henry. No rain for months. I saw a leopard this morning, I said modestly. But no one took me seriously. Did you really? Said the leading hunter, glancing at the book beside me. Young Master Copperfield says he saw a leopard. Too imaginative for his age, said Uncle Henry. Comes from reading too much, I suppose. If you were to get out of the house and into the jungle, said the third member, you might really see a leopard. Don't know what young chaps are coming to these days. I went to bed early and left them to their tales of the good old days when rhinos, cheetahs, and possibly even the legendary phoenix were still available for slaughter. Next day, the camp broke up and we went our different ways. I was still only halfway through David Copperfield, but I saw no reason why it should be left behind to gather dust for another 30 years. And so I took it home with me. I have it still a reminder of how I failed as a shikari but launched myself on a literary career. Thank you for listening.